The screen door had not closed all the way before somebody in the kitchen was already pulling the good plates off the top shelf. That was the signal, not a phone call, not a calendar, just the sound of shoes on the porch and a voice calling from the hallway, and suddenly the kitchen became the most important room in the house. Number 24 required hands, patience, and a willingness to stand at the stove long after the rest of the house sat down. Number 14 split every table it ever landed on, and the people who loved it would not budge. And number 4 turned what most people threw away into something guests reached for twice. These were not restaurant plates. These were the dishes Black families brought out when somebody walked through that front door and had to be fed like they mattered. Hit subscribe because this list runs deep. Here are 30 foods Black families cooked when company came over. Number 30, deviled eggs. Hard-boiled eggs cut in half, the yolks scooped out and mashed with mayonnaise, mustard, salt, pepper, and a dash of pickle juice, then piped or spooned back into the whites and dusted with paprika. The platter came out first before anyone sat down, and it never lasted long enough to see the main course. Deviled eggs were the opening statement. They sat on the coffee table or the sideboard, and they told every guest walking through the door that this kitchen had been running since morning. Nobody wrote down how much mustard. The woman who made them tasted the filling off the back of a spoon and adjusted until it was right. The platter went back empty, and nobody ever asked who made them because everybody already knew. Number 29, coconut cake. 3 layers of white cake, each one brushed with a syrup made from coconut milk, stacked with a thick layer of cream cheese, frosting between them, and the whole thing covered in sweetened, shredded coconut, pressed into the sides and piled across the top until it looked like a snowdrift sitting on the counter. The coconut had to be fresh or freshly shredded from a bag. The woman who brought it carried it with both hands and set it down in the center of the dessert table where nobody could miss it. Coconut cake took half a day and the better part of a bag of sugar, and it was never made for a Tuesday. When it showed up, the dessert table had a centerpiece, and nothing else on that table stood a chance. Number 28, banana pudding, vanilla wafers layered with sliced bananas, and a cooked custard made from eggs, sugar, milk, and vanilla. The whole thing piled into a glass dish and topped with meringue browned under the broiler or a thick cap of whipped cream. The wafers softened overnight and turned into something halfway between cake and pudding. Banana pudding showed up at every gathering where dessert needed to stretch. One dish fed a room, and nobody ever turned it down. The woman who made it knew that the pudding had to sit in the refrigerator long enough for the wafers to give up their crunch, and she timed it so it was ready when the guests arrived, not a minute sooner. Number 27, candied sweet potatoes, peeled, sliced thick, and baked in a heavy dish with butter, brown sugar, cinnamon, nutmeg, and a splash of vanilla until the syrup went thick and the potatoes turned soft enough to crush with the back of a fork. Some families laid marshmallows across the top and ran it under the broiler until they blistered and browned. Others left them plain and let the sugar do the talking. Candied sweet potatoes were the side dish that crossed the line into dessert without anyone deciding when it happened. Children reached for them before the meat and nobody corrected them. The dish came out of the oven bubbling, and by the time it cooled enough to serve, the syrup had thickened into a glaze that coated every slice. Number 26, pound cake, butter, sugar, eggs, flour, and vanilla. Nothing else, no leavening, no frosting, no decoration beyond a dusting of powdered sugar if the baker felt generous. The cake was dense, golden, and cut clean with a knife. It sat on the counter under a glass dome or a clean towel and served itself. Pound cake was the dessert that needed no occasion. It showed up when company came, when someone passed, when a new neighbor moved in, and when there was nothing else to bring. The recipe never changed because there was nothing to change. A good pound cake told you everything about the hands that made it, and a bad one did the same. The woman who baked it never needed praise. The empty plate told her everything she needed to hear. Number 25, oxtails seasoned with salt, pepper, garlic, and onion powder, seared in a hot Dutch oven until the outside browned hard, then braised low and slow in beef broth with carrots, onion, and a splash of Worcestershire until the meat pulled from the bone and the collagen melted into a gravy so thick it set up when it cooled. Oxtails were company food because they took time and money. A few pounds cost more than most of the other meats on this list, and the cooking took the better part of an afternoon. When they hit the table over a bed of white rice, the room went quiet. That was the highest compliment this dish ever received. Oxtails were not everyday food. They were reserved for the nights when the guest list was short and the effort was personal. Number 24, chicken and dumplings. A whole chicken simmered until it fell apart, the meat pulled from the bones and dropped back into the broth, then thick strips of dough rolled out by hand and torn into the pot. The dumplings puffed and went soft on the outside while the center stayed dense and chewy, soaking up the broth until the whole thing turned into something between a soup and a stew. Chicken and dumplings showed up when the weather turned or when someone needed feeding in a way that went beyond hunger. The pot was always bigger than the crowd required because the woman who made it knew that leftovers were part of the gift. Nobody asked for a recipe. The dumplings were different in every kitchen because every woman rolled them differently, and that was the point. Number 23, pimento cheese. Sharp cheddar, grated fine, mixed with diced pimentos from a jar, mayonnaise, a pinch of cayenne, and nothing else. Spread thick on white bread or scooped up with crackers. The bowl sat on the coffee table while people waited for the real food to come out, and half the time the bowl was scraped clean before the table was even set. Pimento cheese crossed the line between appetizer and side dish without anyone deciding which one it was. It showed up early, stayed late, and never once demanded attention. The women who made it never followed a recipe because there was nothing to follow. You grated the cheese, you mixed it, you knew when it was right. Number 22, beef short ribs, seasoned with salt, pepper, garlic powder, and onion powder, seared hard in a heavy pot until a dark crust formed on every side, then braised low in beef broth with onion, carrots, and celery until the meat pulled away from the bone in thick, soft pieces. The braising liquid reduced into a gravy dark enough to stain a white plate. Short ribs were expensive by the standards of this list, and that was part of the point. When they showed up, it meant somebody had decided that tonight was worth the money. The bones went home with the guest who asked, and the gravy went over rice the next morning. The pot went empty, and the bones went clean, and the woman who cooked them never needed to explain why she chose them over a roast. Number 21, okra cut into rounds and cooked slow with tomatoes, diced onion, and just enough sugar to soften the acid until the whole pot thickened into a tangy stew that clung to whatever sat beside it on the plate. Some families tossed in a handful of corn kernels. Others dropped in a few pieces of smoked sausage and let them simmer until they split. This was the dish that divided a room the same way raw oysters did. You either grew up with that texture or you pushed it to the edge of your plate and said nothing. The people who loved it spooned it over rice and soaked up every drop. The people who did not love it watched from across the table and wondered what they were missing. Number 20, meatloaf. Ground beef mixed with breadcrumbs, egg, diced onion, salt, pepper, and a splash of Worcestershire, shaped into a loaf in a baking pan and topped with a glaze of ketchup and brown sugar that caramelized in the oven into a sweet, sticky shell. The loaf came out firm enough to slice clean and soft enough to fall apart on the fork. Some families mixed in ground pork for richness. Others folded in a diced bell pepper and called that the secret ingredient. Meatloaf was a weeknight dish that got promoted to company food when the glaze was right and the sides were strong enough to back it up. The pan came out of the oven, heavy enough to need both hands, and the first slice always went to the person who arrived first. Number 19, cornbread dressing. Cornbread crumbled by hand into a bowl, mixed with sautéed celery, onion, and bell pepper, seasoned with sage, salt, pepper, and poultry seasoning, then moistened with chicken broth and eggs, and baked in a heavy pan until the top turned golden and the inside set firm enough to hold a spoonful. Dressing was not stuffing. It never went inside a bird. It went into its own pan and came to the table as a side dish with its own identity, spooned out in thick squares and set next to the greens and the meat. Cornbread dressing showed up at every company table from Thanksgiving through Easter, and in some families, it showed up every Sunday in between. Number 18, sweet potato pie. A smooth custard of mashed sweet potatoes, sugar, butter, eggs, cinnamon, nutmeg, and vanilla poured into an unbaked pie shell and baked until the filling set and the crust turned golden. The surface cracked slightly as it cooled, and that crack was the sign it was done right. Sweet potato pie was the dessert that separated the kitchen from the bakery. Nobody bought this pie. It came from a home kitchen made by somebody who peeled and boiled the potatoes by hand and mashed them until not a single lump remained. The recipe lived in the hands of whoever made it, and no two families made it the same way. The woman who baked one carried that recipe in her hands, not on paper, and she would not share it with just anyone who asked. Number 17, lemon meringue pie. A flaky, blind-baked crust filled with a cooked lemon curd, thick and tart enough to make your jaw tighten, topped with a tall cloud of meringue, beaten until it held stiff peaks, then browned under the broiler until the tips turned gold. The meringue was the test. Beat it too little and it wept, leaving puddles of clear liquid between the filling and the topping that made the whole pie look like it was crying. Beat it too long and it turned grainy. Brown it too fast and the outside charred while the inside stayed raw. Lemon meringue pie was a dessert that exposed the skill of the person who made it the moment the first slice came out of the pan. A clean slice with the curd holding firm and the meringue standing tall was proof. A slice that collapsed or wept was evidence of something else entirely, and the table noticed. The curd itself took patience. Lemon juice, sugar, egg yolks, and butter stirred over low heat until the mixture went thick and heavy and pulled away from the sides of the pot. Pull it off too early and the filling ran. Leave it too long and the eggs scrambled. The whole thing had to cool before it went into the shell, and the shell had to be fully baked and completely dry, or the bottom turned soggy within an hour. This was the pie that grandmothers used to measure whether a young woman had learned enough to be trusted with a holiday table. The crust had to be tender. The curd had to set without breaking. The meringue had to hold for hours without shrinking. If all three happened in the same pie, the conversation changed. That pie earned a reputation, and the woman who made it carried that reputation for the rest of her life. Number 16, macaroni and cheese. Elbow macaroni, boiled just short of tender, stirred into a custard of eggs, evaporated milk, butter, and sharp cheddar, poured into a baking dish, topped with more cheese, and baked until the top blistered and turned brown in spots while the inside stayed creamy. This was not stovetop macaroni. This was the baked kind, cut into squares and served with a spatula. Macaroni and cheese was the dish that started arguments. Every family had a version, and every version was the right one. Some used Velveeta, some used 3 cheeses, some added a pinch of mustard powder. The woman who brought hers to the table did not ask for opinions, and she did not offer the recipe unless she trusted the person asking. Number 15, German chocolate cake. 3 layers of chocolate cake filled and topped with a cooked coconut and pecan frosting that was thick, sticky, and sweet enough to make your teeth ache. The frosting was not whipped. It was cooked on the stovetop with evaporated milk, sugar, egg yolks, butter, and vanilla, stirred until it thickened, then loaded with shredded coconut and chopped pecans and spread warm over the layers. The cake itself was lighter than a regular chocolate cake, almost delicate, and the frosting did all the heavy lifting. German chocolate cake at a gathering meant somebody had committed to standing at the stove stirring frosting for half an hour without walking away. The frosting alone took 3 pots, a whisk, and the kind of patience that does not come from a cookbook. It came from repetition. Number 14, fried catfish, whole fillets or thick pieces dredged in seasoned cornmeal, sometimes with a little flour mixed in, and fried in a deep skillet of hot oil until the coating turned a dark gold and crackled when you bit through it. The fish inside stayed white, moist, and flaky, and the cornmeal crust held on without peeling away. Fried catfish carried a geography with it. It came from rivers and ponds, from families who fished on Saturday mornings and cleaned the catch in the backyard before the sun got too high. The fish fry was its own event, separate from Sunday dinner, and when company was involved, the fryer never stopped. One batch came out, the next went in, and the platter on the table stayed full until the oil cooled. The sides were simple because the fish demanded attention. Hot sauce on the table, a pile of white bread, coleslaw, and more of that cornbread from the same kitchen. The woman running the skillet knew the oil temperature by the sound it made when the fish went in. Too quiet meant the oil was not hot enough and the crust would turn soggy. Too loud meant the outside would burn before the inside cooked through. She listened, adjusted the flame, and kept going. Every piece came out right because she had been doing this since she was old enough to stand next to her own mother and hand her the cornmeal. Fried catfish at a company table was not just a meal, it was a demonstration of a skill passed down through hands that never wrote anything on paper. Here is something that never shows up in any conversation about these meals. The timeline. When word got out that company was coming, the kitchen did not start that evening. It started the night before. The cake went into the oven at 10 at night. The beans went into water to soak while the house slept. By dawn, the first pot was already on the stove, and by noon, the counters were full. This was not cooking. This was logistics, run by one woman who held the entire sequence in her head without a list, without a timer, without asking for help until she decided help was needed. Every dish arrived at the table at the same moment, hot, finished, in its proper place. That coordination was invisible to the guests who sat down and filled their plates, but the woman in the kitchen knew exactly what it cost, and she never put a price on it. Number 13, rum cake, a bundt cake soaked in a butter and rum glaze while it was still hot, so the syrup seeped into every ridge and tunnel and turned the crumb dense, sticky, and sweet enough to perfume the room. The batter started with the box mix and a package of instant vanilla pudding, and nobody was embarrassed about that because the glaze was what made it. Butter, sugar, water, and dark rum brought to a boil and poured slow over the warm cake while it sat upside down in the pan. The cake absorbed it all and came out glistening. Rum cake traveled well, kept for days, and got better as it sat. The woman who brought one to a company table knew it would outlast every other dessert in the kitchen. Number 12, string beans with smoked turkey. Fresh green beans, snapped by hand, the ends pulled off one at a time, then simmered for hours with a smoked turkey leg or wing in a pot of seasoned broth until the beans went soft and the meat fell off the bone into the liquid. The potlikker turned smoky and rich, and some families spooned it over rice as a meal on its own. String beans showed up on every company table because they stretched without limit. One more handful of beans, another cup of water, and the pot fed 2 more people without anyone noticing. The turkey did the seasoning. The thyme did the rest. The pot sat on the back burner all day, and the kitchen smelled like smoke and salt from morning until the table was set. Number 11, caramel cake. Yellow cake layers stacked with a cooked caramel icing that started with sugar melted dry in a heavy pot until it turned amber, then hit with butter and cream and beaten until it thickened into a smooth, glossy frosting that set firm on the outside and stayed soft underneath. The icing was the entire reputation of the cake. Get the sugar too dark and the icing turned bitter. Pull it too early and it slid off the layers. The window between right and wrong was narrow, and the woman who hit it every time was known for that and little else. Caramel cake did not travel. It sat on the counter at home, and people came to it. Number 10, glazed ham. A whole bone-in ham, scored in a diamond pattern, studded with cloves, coated in a brown sugar and pineapple juice glaze, and baked until the outside caramelized, and the kitchen smelled like a holiday, whether it was one or not. The ham sat at the center of the table and anchored everything around it. It was the first thing you saw when you walked into the room and the last thing to leave the kitchen. Sliced thin for plates, thick for sandwiches the next morning, and the bone went into a pot of beans the day after that. Nothing was wasted. A glazed ham was an investment that kept paying out over 3 or 4 meals, and the woman who bought it knew that before she picked it up at the store. Number 9, baked chicken, whole leg quarters, or a cut up bird seasoned with salt, pepper, garlic powder, onion powder, and paprika laid in a roasting pan and baked uncovered until the skin tightened and turned dark and crispy and the juices ran clear. No breading, no flour, just seasoning and heat and patience. Baked chicken was the quiet centerpiece. It did not demand the attention that fried chicken did, and it did not carry the same labor. But a well-seasoned bird pulled from the oven with the skin cracking and the pan full of drippings was its own kind of proof. The drippings went into gravy, the leftover meat went into sandwiches, and the bones went into a pot for stock that became the base of next week's soup. There is something underneath this list that nobody names out loud. When Black families cooked for company, they were not just feeding people, they were building evidence. Evidence that the household ran right, that the kitchen had range, that no matter what the rest of the week looked like, this family could set a table that left nobody wanting. The dishes were the testimony, every plate in its place, every bowl full, every guest served before the host sat down. That kind of table did not come from money. It came from timing, from knowledge passed hand to hand, from years of standing close enough to learn what done smells like. The woman running that kitchen held the entire sequence in her memory, and she never once wrote it down. Number 8, 7-Up cake. A butter cake made with an entire bottle of 7-Up soda poured straight into the batter. The carbonation made the cake rise tall and gave it a texture lighter than air. Butter, sugar, eggs, flour, lemon extract, and a full bottle of 7-Up. Nothing else. The glaze on top was powdered sugar and lemon juice, and it hardened into a thin, sweet shell that cracked when you pressed a fork through it. This cake confused people who had never seen it before. A soda in a cake sounded wrong, but one bite fixed that. The crumb was impossibly tender, the flavor was bright without being sweet enough to overwhelm, and the whole thing disappeared faster than any chocolate cake on the same table. Number 7, ambrosia salad, canned mandarin oranges, pineapple chunks, shredded coconut, miniature marshmallows, and maraschino cherries folded into a bowl of whipped cream or sour cream and chilled until everything melded into a cold, sweet cloud. The bowl came out of the refrigerator already set, and it sat between the desserts and the sides without belonging fully to either one. Children loved it because it was sweet and cold and bright. Adults tolerated it because it was tradition and because the woman who brought it had been bringing it for 30 years and was not about to stop now. She never measured a single ingredient. She opened the cans, drained them, folded everything together, and trusted that the proportions would sort themselves out. They always did. Ambrosia was the dish that proved a company table needed something that nobody took seriously. Number 6, firm, unripe tomatoes, sliced thick, dredged in cornmeal and flour, and fried in a skillet until the coating turned gold and the tomato inside softened just enough to give under a fork without falling apart. The tang of the green tomato cut through the oil, and each slice held its shape on the plate like a small medallion. Some families served them with a drizzle of hot sauce. Others set them next to the fish and let them work as a palate cleanser between bites. These showed up at the end of the garden season when the tomatoes refused to ripen and somebody decided they were not going to waste. Fried green tomatoes were a side dish that punched above its weight, and the people who grew up eating them never stopped craving that sour, crispy bite. Number 5, beef stew. Chunks of beef browned hard in a heavy pot, then simmered with potatoes, carrots, onions, celery, and tomato paste until the meat went tender and the broth thickened into a dark, rich gravy that coated every vegetable. The pot stayed on the stove all afternoon, and it smelled like Sunday even when it was a Saturday. Beef stew was company food disguised as weeknight food. It did not demand a formal table. It demanded a deep bowl, a thick piece of bread, and the willingness to sit down and eat slowly. The pot held enough for seconds, and the seconds were always better than the first because the gravy had thickened while you ate. The woman who made it never wrote the recipe down because the recipe changed with whatever the refrigerator held that morning. Number 4, pickled watermelon rind. The white inner rind of the watermelon, peeled, cubed, and slow cooked in a sweet brine of vinegar and sugar with whole cinnamon and cloves until the pieces turned translucent and candy soft. Jarred and kept cold, they came out as a garnish or a side that nobody expected and everybody reached for twice. Pickled watermelon rind was a test of the kitchen. It said, "This household wastes nothing." The fruit went to the table, the rind went to the stove, and the only thing that hit the trash was the green skin. The jar sat in the back of the refrigerator between gatherings, and the woman who made it knew exactly how many jars she had left before the next watermelon season. Number 3, fried chicken. A whole bird cut into pieces, soaked overnight in buttermilk and hot sauce, dredged in seasoned flour, and lowered into a cast iron skillet filled with enough oil to come halfway up the sides. The oil popped and hissed, and the kitchen got hot, and the woman standing over that skillet did not flinch because she had been doing this since before the people at the table were born. The coating sealed tight around the meat and turned a deep, uneven brown that crackled when you bit through it. The dark meat stayed juicy. The breast dried out if you left it a minute too long, and the person frying it knew exactly when to pull each piece because she had burned enough of them 20 years ago to never burn another. Fried chicken was the dish that settled every argument about this kitchen. It did not matter what else was on the table. If the chicken was right, the meal was right. If the chicken was wrong, the whole spread failed, and everybody at the table knew it even if nobody said a word. The platter sat in the center, piled high, steam rising off the pieces. Dark meat went first because the people who grew up in that kitchen knew what they wanted. Wings went to the children. Breast went to the guests who did not know any better. And the back, the piece with the oysters tucked into the spine, went to the woman who cooked it, eaten standing up in the kitchen after everyone else had been served. Number 2, red velvet cake, 3 layers of deep red cake, barely chocolate, stacked with a thick layer of cream cheese, frosting between each one and across the top. The color came from red food coloring, and the tang came from buttermilk reacting with cocoa and vinegar. The frosting was the anchor. Cream cheese, butter, powdered sugar, and vanilla beaten until it could hold its own weight. A properly frosted red velvet cake looked like it belonged in a bakery window, but it came out of a home kitchen where somebody spent the better part of a morning getting the layers even. This was the cake that ended the meal and started the compliments. When the knife came down and the layers showed clean, red, and white and even, the room already knew the answer. This kitchen could be trusted. Number 1, potato salad. Potatoes boiled until they were tender but not falling apart, cut into chunks while still warm, and folded into a dressing of mayonnaise, mustard, sweet pickle relish, hard-boiled eggs, celery, and onion. Some families added a shake of paprika on top. Others stirred in a spoonful of sugar. The bowl went into the refrigerator and came out cold, scooped onto the plate next to whatever meat anchored the meal. Potato salad was number 1 because it answered a question nobody asked out loud. What is the one dish that tells you whether this kitchen can be trusted? Not the showpiece, not the dessert, the potato salad. It was the first thing tasted and the last thing judged, and the verdict carried weight far beyond the table. A dry potato salad with too much mayonnaise and no seasoning said one thing. A bowl with the eggs cut just right, the celery still holding its crunch, the mustard balanced against the sweet, said something else entirely. This was the dish that traveled in every car, sat on every table, and started more conversations than any cake or roast on this entire list.
Skillet candied yams were a feast for both the eyes and the taste buds, glistening in a thick glaze of butter, brown sugar, and spices. Sweet potatoes were peeled and sliced thick, then arranged in a cast-iron skillet where they simmered gently in the sweet, buttery syrup. Cinnamon and nutmeg added warmth, while the natural sugars from the potatoes deepened the caramelization. This was not a quick dish. The yams were left to cook slowly until every slice was tender and every surface was coated with the glossy glaze. The smell alone could draw family members into the kitchen, eager for a taste before the meal was served. On holiday tables, this side dish often sat beside savory meats, providing a sweet contrast that balanced the plate. In everyday meals, it was a treat that made even a humble dinner feel special. Supermarkets today offer canned versions, but they cannot replicate the rich, layered flavor of fresh yams caramelized in a skillet. For those who remember, the first bite of skillet candied yams was pure Southern comfort, the kind that lingered long after the plate was clean. Fish head stew was a dish born out of necessity, yet it carried surprising depth and flavor. Fish heads, often discarded by others, were simmered slowly with onions, potatoes, and rice until they yielded every ounce of richness to the broth. My grandmother insisted the heads made the stew better than fillets, providing body and nourishment that nothing else could. The bones and skin flavored the liquid until it turned hearty and comforting. Potatoes stretched the meal, rice thickened it, and vegetables added substance, turning scraps into a filling supper. The taste was strong, earthy, and unforgettable, reminding everyone that no part of food should go unused. For Black families in the 1960s, fish head stew was a common way to stretch the catch of the day, ensuring nothing went to waste. It became a lesson in thrift and gratitude, proof that survival demanded creativity. Fish head stew was both humble and mighty, sustaining families through lean times with flavor and tradition.
In July, when both came in together, Black families across the Deep South picked them at first light and had them cooking before the heat got bad. Okra's name derives from the Igbo word okwuru. It arrived in the American South through West African captives who carried seeds and knowledge of its cultivation across the Middle Passage. Combined with dead ripe tomatoes cut into rough chunks, okra's natural thickening power turned the liquid into a glossy, rich stew that needed nothing more than salt, pepper, and cornbread to soak it up. The technique mirrors traditional West African one-pot stew making, where a single vessel produced a complete meal from whatever the garden gave that day. By September, the overflow went into jars and came back out in January when the garden was frozen solid. The knowledge of how long to cook it, how much heat, it lives nowhere written down.
Baked rice pudding with raisins was a dessert that came together from what was already in the kitchen, making it a perfect example of soul food thrift and ingenuity. Leftover rice was never thrown away. Instead, it was mixed with milk, eggs, sugar, and warm spices like cinnamon or nutmeg, then baked slowly until it set into a creamy custard. Raisins added bursts of sweetness, plumping up as they absorbed the milk and spice. This pudding often marked the end of Sunday dinner, or was made on special occasions when the house filled with the scent of vanilla and baked sugar. Served warm or chilled, it carried the taste of comfort and resourcefulness, especially during times when store-bought desserts were too costly. Every cook had their own variation, some adding a touch of lemon zest or a sprinkle of nutmeg on top for extra flavor. It was a dish that could be enjoyed over several days, growing richer as the flavors melded in the refrigerator. While boxed pudding mixes replaced many homemade versions over the years, nothing matches the texture or taste of rice pudding baked slowly in the oven with raisins scattered like little treasures throughout. Chicken wing stew was one of those meals that would surprise modern ears, since wings were once the cheapest part of the bird. My grandmother bought them in bulk when she could, piling them into pots with onions, celery, and carrots. Slowly simmered, the wings gave up their fat and flavor, turning thin broth into rich gravy. She thickened it with flour or cornstarch, serving it hot over rice or bread to stretch it even further. It was messy eating, but no one complained because the taste was so comforting. Wings may be prized today, but in the 1960s they were scraps, turned into nourishment by clever hands. She said every part of the bird had value if you treated it with respect. Chicken wing stew carried the spirit of thrift, transforming what others dismissed into something that filled the house with warmth. It was proof that good cooking did not depend on wealth, only patience and care.
Poke salad was not a dish for the uninformed. The pokeweed plant grows wild across the American South, tall, purple-stemmed, with dark berries that can poison a child and leaves that will make an adult violently sick if prepared wrong. But if you know, picked young, before the toxins concentrate in the stems, boiled hard in one pot of water, that water completely poured off, covered with fresh water and boiled again, sometimes a third time. What came out was soft, slightly bitter, deeply green, then fried in a cast iron skillet with fat back until the edges crisped. The food with roots culinary history, database documents pokeweed as a traditional Southern survival food prepared by boiling multiple times to remove toxicity, a technique rooted in indigenous Southern knowledge that Black communities adapted and passed orally for generations. In the hungry stretch of late winter, poke salad stood between a family and an empty table. You did not learn this from a book. You learned it standing beside someone who knew exactly how many times the water had to change. That person is gone from most households now. She put them right in the ashes, not near the fire, directly in the gray-white coals that pulsed after the wood burned down.
Hog brains and eggs was once a breakfast staple in rural communities, valued for being inexpensive, high in protein, and deeply flavorful. The brains were cleaned, seasoned, and sautéed until tender, then folded into scrambled eggs for a creamy texture and rich taste, unlike anything else. This dish was often cooked in a cast-iron skillet, where the residual heat helped meld the flavors together. Served with biscuits or grits, it was a hearty start to the day for those working long hours in the fields or factories. In many African American households, it was both a practical and cultural dish, rooted in the tradition of using every part of the animal. Its preparation carried the knowledge of how to clean and cook ingredients that many today would pass over. Over time, changing tastes and supermarket offerings pushed hog brains out of everyday cooking, and with it went the skill to prepare them well. While it may seem unusual to modern diners, for those who grew up with it, hog brains and eggs were just breakfast, warm, filling, and made with care. Shrimp cocktail served in small cups with tangy cocktail sauce was elegant finger food that made children feel sophisticated. The cold, tender shrimp dipped in spicy sweet sauce, creating flavors that seemed fancy. Mothers would boil shrimp in seasoned water with Old Bay seasoning, lemon, and bay leaves until they turned pink and curled, then plunge them into ice water to stop the cooking. Once chilled, the shrimp were peeled and deveined, their tails left on for easy handling, then arranged around small cups filled with cocktail sauce made from ketchup, horseradish, lemon juice, and Worcestershire sauce. The cocktail sauce had a sharp, tangy kick that balanced the shrimp's natural sweetness, creating combinations that felt restaurant quality. In the 1970s, Black households, shrimp cocktail represented luxury and celebration, an appetizer that elevated holiday gatherings. Children loved shrimp cocktail because they could hold the shrimp by the tail and dip them like French fries.
When money ran to nothing, dried pinto beans were what kept families alive. In 1922, a pound cost under 5 cents, enough to feed 6 people if you started them before sunrise. You picked through them the night before, soaked them cold, then in the morning added a ham bone or fatback and a halved onion and left them alone until noon. Salt went in only at the end. Salt early made the skins tough, and a tough bean was a ruined pot. That rule was unwritten, passed by watching her fish one out and press it between her fingers to check. Sharecropper households in Mississippi and Arkansas relied on dried field peas and beans through most of the lean season, stretching a single pot across 2 days by adding water and reheating. Nobody who grew up in these kitchens forgets the smell, low and smoky and dense, filling every room before anyone else woke. Stewed tomatoes and okra was a summer dish that started on the vine and ended in the pot the same day.
Potlikker soup was more than just a humble broth. It was the essence of the greens it came from. When collards, turnip greens, or mustard greens simmered slowly with a bit of seasoning and maybe a ham bone, the cooking liquid would take on a deep, savory flavor and a rich, earthy aroma. Nothing in the kitchen went to waste, and that potlikker was treasured for its nourishment, especially in leaner times. It was often sipped straight from a bowl or paired with cornbread, which was crumbled right into the broth to soak up every last drop. This soup carried vitamins, minerals, and memories of long afternoons spent around the table, talking as the pot bubbled on the stove. In African American kitchens, it was both medicine and comfort, believed to restore strength after illness or a hard day's work. The taste was unmistakable: salty, smoky, and green all at once, with each batch a little different depending on the greens and the cook. Today, store-bought greens rarely yield the same kind of rich cooking liquid, and many younger cooks have never tasted this kitchen staple. Yet for those who remember, Potlikker was a liquid link to home. Pickled watermelon rind was a dish born out of a waste-not spirit. When families ate fresh watermelon, they saved the rinds, slicing off the tough green skin and brining the white flesh in vinegar, sugar, and spices. The result was a tangy, sweet pickle that could be eaten alongside meats, beans, or cornbread. In hard times, nothing edible was thrown away, and this recipe proved that even scraps could become something delicious. Pickled rind added brightness to plates that were otherwise heavy with starch and salt, lifting meals and making them feel more balanced. Children loved the odd flavor, and adults appreciated that it stretched food supplies further. Pickled watermelon rind became common in many Southern households, passed down as a recipe of ingenuity. It turned what was once destined for the trash into something cherished, embodying the creativity of Black families making do with what they had.
But before the garden gave anything, before the beans had soaked overnight, there was couscous, and it kept people moving when nothing else was in the house. A Senegambian dish documented in WPA slave narratives from Texas, couscous traveled across the Atlantic in the memory of West African captives who had eaten a version of it for generations. Coarse cornmeal poured into a dry, hot iron skillet with a little lard, stirred until it browned and formed a crust, then scraped up and served with cane syrup poured over the top. The result was crispy in patches, soft underneath, sweet from the syrup, smoky from the iron, a breakfast that cost almost nothing and tasted like something worth waking early for. In the 1920s, cane syrup was the cheapest sweetener in rural Louisiana and Mississippi. Nobody makes couscous anymore. The woman who made it every morning is not here to make it.
Cabbage and salt pork stew was the kind of meal that could stretch to feed a crowd without stretching the budget. The cabbage would be chopped and simmered slowly with chunks of salt pork, which released their fat and smoky flavor into the pot. The result was tender, silky cabbage leaves bathed in a savory broth with just the right touch of salt. In many homes, this dish was a weeknight regular, not because it was flashy, but because it was filling, dependable, and used ingredients that were always on hand. Served alongside cornbread or over a small scoop of rice, it could transform the simplest table into a satisfying meal. This stew also carried the comforting smell of something cooking low and slow, the kind of aroma that filled the whole house and made everyone hungry before it was even served. It was the food of patience, where the flavors had time to come together without rush. Supermarkets today offer pre-shredded cabbage and processed pork products, but they cannot recreate the texture and taste of the old, home-cooked version. For those who grew up with it, cabbage and salt pork stew was proof that thrift and flavor could live in the same pot. Fried Spam with eggs became breakfast solution when bacon was too expensive and families needed protein to start long days of work and school right. Spam was sliced thick and fried until the edges caramelized and crisped while the center stayed tender, creating textural contrasts that made the processed meat more interesting and actually delicious. Eggs were fried in the same pan, picking up the salty, meaty flavors from the Spam's rendered fat for perfect combination. Together, they created breakfast that provided sustained energy and cost less than 50 cents to feed 4 people every morning. In the 1970s, Spam represented wartime ingenuity that continued helping families stretch food budgets long after rationing ended throughout the country. The canned meat didn't require refrigeration and lasted indefinitely, making it perfect for households with unreliable power or limited storage space available. Fried Spam with eggs represented pragmatism over pretension, showing that feeding your family mattered more than impressing anyone with fancy ingredients or sophisticated cooking techniques. Mustard greens with ham hock was a pot of comfort that simmered slowly, filling the kitchen with a savory aroma that promised a satisfying meal. The slightly bitter greens were washed thoroughly, then cooked low and slow with a smoked ham hock, which released its flavor into the broth. As the meat softened, it was shredded into the greens, creating a perfect mix of smoky, salty, and earthy tastes. This dish was often ladled into bowls alongside cornbread, which soaked up the flavorful potlikker at the bottom. It was a year-round favorite, but especially welcome in cooler months when hearty, warming food was needed. The ham hock was not just a flavoring. It represented the tradition of making the most of every cut of meat, ensuring nothing went to waste. Supermarkets today sell pre-washed greens and pre-cooked meats, but they lack the depth of flavor that comes from a slow afternoon simmering on the stove. For many, mustard greens with ham hock were not just food. They were part of the rhythm of home life, where patience in the kitchen always paid off. Molasses milk drink was a common way to stretch both sweeteners and dairy during times of hardship. Hot milk, often reconstituted from powdered milk, was whisked with a spoonful of molasses until warm and smooth. The result was a drink that children could have before school or adults could sip before long workdays. It carried natural sweetness and important nutrients from molasses, while offering comfort when sugar was too costly to use. Families appreciated it because it was affordable, easy to prepare, and nourishing. Many children who grew up during lean times remembered this drink as both a treat and a necessity, even if they preferred chocolate or sugar when they could get it. The molasses milk drink proved that small substitutions could keep sweetness alive in daily life without breaking ration limits. It was simple, practical, and tied directly to the struggles of everyday survival, becoming a quiet but important memory of perseverance.
30 dishes, and every one of them walked through the same front door. Not from a restaurant, not from a menu, from a kitchen where the woman running it learned by standing close enough to feel the heat off somebody else's stove. Pick the one your family made gospel and cook it this week. No measuring cups, no timers, just memory and a hot stove. Drop the name in the comments. The dish your people always brought out when company walked in. Come back for the next one.